Welcome, this is Biec from A.J.B Counseling and Psychotherapy. I am a psychotherapist in the state of New York and New Jersey, and I specialize in the treatment of panic disorder and agoraphobia. Anything panic related, I'm your guy. So what I want to cover in this video is a experimental approach to treating panic disorder. This should of course also work for agoraphobia, and there were studies done testing one of the components in isolation on agoraphobia. So there were studies done on paradoxical intent. So we know that works. If you didn't see the video, I made a video on it. I believe the title of the video is comparing 3 different interventions for the treatment of agoraphobia, and paradoxical intent was one of them. I'll give you the quick rundown of it. It was found to be promising on one hand, but at the same time less reliable on the other. That's how I would summarize it the best. They found the other 2 interventions to be more reliable. However, the maximum potential was lower. So to put it another way, paradoxical intent is like a haymaker. Do you know what a haymaker is? In boxing, a haymaker is one of those big wind-up punches where if you hit, you knock the guy out. That's what paradoxical intent is, and I see this in my practice. So it's really, really worthwhile to apply this, at the very least try this. And it was found, so it was found to be effective with agoraphobia. There were substantially more patients in the paradoxical intent condition as opposed to the other interventions that reached a, let's call it, higher cure rate, okay? But simultaneously, there were a lot more people who just didn't respond as well. And it also took them longer to get there, okay? Because it's a tough intervention to pull off. We'll get into all of that. Also, we have research testing acceptance and commitment therapy on panic disorder. I don't remember if it was tested on agoraphobia. I should check that. I will check that later. As far as I know, I have not come across acceptance and commitment therapy being used on agoraphobia, but there was one study looking at this. Specifically, there was a study, and I went over that study. It's the Novel Approaches to Treating Panic Disorder. I think that's the title of the video. And they found very, very nice results. It was a pilot study. Pilot studies are done when we don't yet know if the direction is fruitful one. So we kind of like test the waters. And the researchers, Meret et al., they tested that direction and they found it to be very promising. So here, what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to extend that study. What I'm proposing. So this I wrote this. It's a research proposal. And we'll be extending that study by combining acceptance and commitment therapy with paradoxical intent and applying both of those things onto exposure therapy. There's every reason to believe that it should work. The other reason why I am confident it will work is because I do it in my own practice. Now, not everybody can pull off paradoxical intent. That's okay. There's other slower, softer ways to go about it. But this is really the bee's knees. When people get this right, I mean, they end their panic attack like that. I just recently had somebody who did that. It was beautiful. I met with this individual for maybe a total of 5 sessions, something like that, before they were able to pull this off. And once they were able to pull this off, we downgraded to every other week. I think now we're doing once a month. I haven't seen this person in a long time, so I'm assuming everything's going well. Last I was meeting with that person, it was great. They were free. So let's get into this. Let me conceptualize for you how this would work. So if you are interested in pulling this off, you'll be prepared to do that. So the beautiful thing about acceptance and paradoxical intent is that they operate on the same variable. And so let me explain what I mean by that. Here, check this out. This is a nice way of summarizing how everything ties in together. So Okay, so I'm gonna assume that you haven't watched the other videos discussing acceptance and commitment therapy. So we gotta discuss ACT, that's acceptance and commitment therapy, and then we gotta discuss paradoxical intent. Okay, so here is a hierarchy. Right here, this is the hierarchy, right? This triangle. At the bottom of the triangle, we have perhaps you right now as someone who has not gone through treatment, so you are the untreated patient, and your relationship to panic attacks is unwilling and seeking escape. See right here, you are unwilling and seeking escape. It's kind of blue on blue, so it might be hard to see. This coincides with, look on the left side right here, this coincides with a low level of willingness. So let's just say this is maybe 0. You're unwilling to experience. So the variable that ACT and paradoxical intent operate on is your willingness to experience whatever, right? Like let's say you have a flu, you're all right with it. And you have the sniffles, you're all right. I have the sniffles right now, so that's why I'm thinking of that probably. You're okay with that. You're not, I don't want to feel that. You're more open to allowing whatever experience is unfolding within you to experience, to unfold. So ACT and PI, that's acceptance and commitment therapy, and paradoxical intent, both operate on willingness. This is the variable that these approaches aim to manipulate within you. Okay? Willingness to experience. And as I mentioned, when you are an untreated patient, your willingness is somewhere around 0. Okay? So enter acceptance-based interventions. Enter ACT. So I write, when you start practicing ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, your willingness to experience panic increases. ACT aims to foster an attitude of openness, it helps you see how trying to control your inner experiences, how doing what you've been doing so far to help yourself is counterproductive. It's not just that it doesn't work. It's not just that what you've been doing so far doesn't work. It's that it's been hurting you. Okay? That's the concept. That's the idea that ACT really helps you understand. And it's very, very important. You as someone who has a panic disorder or agoraphobia, you really have to understand that the stuff you do mentally, the stuff you do behaviorally, is not just not working, it's counterproductive. It's actually feeding into your problem, feeding into the panic. So ACT's philosophy is very much Eastern, is very much Buddhist, in that Buddhists, they tend to encourage an attitude of que sera, sera. What will be, right? This openness to allow, if you're feeling pains, you just let the pain be there. You don't react to it. You don't push against it. If you feel fear, you just let the fear be there. You don't react to it. You don't push away against it. You don't try to control it. If you're feeling tense and it's really like, so maybe uncomfortable, you might say, again, you don't push against it. You just let it be there. You observe it. You allow it to be there. And then what's also very important in ACT, you go back to doing whatever you were doing before, right? So this value-based action, also very important. So ACT, if we were to think of this as a continuum, ACT represents a middle level on the willingness scale. You're not quite maxed out on the willingness level, like you're not chasing after an experience, but you're not running away from it either. So you're not at 0 and you're not at 100. Okay, so far, so good, right? So far, everybody follows. ACT is this middle willingness. That's been proven already. That's been supported. We can't say proven in science, I guess. There's been support to suggest that alone is very helpful for panic disorder symptoms. Check out the study on the novel approaches to panic disorder treatment. That's where I cover the research that tests ACT, okay? But now we can take this a step further. This is that haymaker. This is that knockout punch that if you pull this off, your panic ends right then and there. Enter paradoxical intent. Paradoxical intent represents, think of it as 100% willingness to experience something. In this case, we're talking about experiencing panic. Because the instructions you receive when you're learning paradoxical intent, when your therapist is teaching you paradoxical intent, they will tell you to make your anxiety worse. They will tell you, if you are afraid of suffocating, they'll tell you, go and suffocate. If you're feeling you're having a heart attack, they'll tell you, go have a heart attack. If you are afraid of whatever, of having a panic attack, they'll tell you, tell yourself, all right, I want to have the biggest panic attack right now, right there, right there, right there, and right now, right here and right here and right now. Okay, so that's why paradoxical intent represents 100% willingness, and maxed out willingness. Now, this is not an easy thing to pull off. However, in theory, right, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish through this research and through this methodology. Paradoxical intent by itself, like I said, is difficult to pull off. Based on the study that was done on agoraphobia, we could see that when it works, it really knocks things out, but a lot of people can't pull it off. So there's a lot of variance. Some people are just stuck on the bottom, and then some people are like all the way up top, right? So what we gotta do is figure out a way to make this more digestible for more people. And that's why ACT is so beautiful here, because ACT has a very gentle approach. Our paradoxical intent is kind of brutal, right? When I tell you, go make your anxiety worse, or if you tell me I'm about to have a panic attack and I tell you, go make it worse, that's kind of brutal, right? That's kind of very forceful. It's asking you to make a big leap. You'd be going from 0 to 100. That's a big leap. Now, theoretically, if we can bring you up here to the middle first with ACT, we should soften the blow. We should make the trip shorter for you. Now you're going from 50 to 100. So this ACT would represent 50. You feel me? This is why it's so exciting. This is why this idea of first training you in ACT, or you training yourself, pick up a book on ACT, and you practicing ACT skills and then bouncing between ACT and paradoxical intent. So imagine that you enter this meditative state. Maybe you're having some panic symptoms. And so you start practicing your ACT skills. So their ACT skills are value-based action, diffusion, and just this general attitude of understanding. It's like there's some philosophy involved. A lot of times I say that treatment for panic disorder requires some philosophical, deeper understanding of reality and nature. So this distance from what you're experiencing. One way of summarizing what ACT wants you to do is this. Think of your mind as a river. So we have a river flowing over here, river flowing, right, on the bottom of the screen. Your thoughts are that river, and where you keep your attention is represented by you either being in the current, being pulled by the current, being carried by the current, or you standing on the banks of the river, observing the flow of the river. So here you are on the banks, or here you are in the river being swept up by it. When you're being swept up by the current, that's you getting caught up with a thought. So something comes up for you, oh, I think I'm having a panic attack. Okay, that's just a stimulus. So ACT will treat that as a stimulus, something that pops up for you that can set off a chain reaction, right? You experience that thought, I think I'm having a panic attack, or maybe even before that, you experience something like a sensation that maybe some sort of a constriction in your throat, and you feel like you then jump to the conclusion that you might be about to suffocate, something like that. You're swept up by the current of your mind. When you then go down the trail, you follow the trail of that thought, and you start saying to yourself, oh, I should do something about that. Oh, I hope it doesn't da-da-da-da-da. Oh, well, yesterday was really bad. I hope I don't have... That's you just going down the river, flowing with the river. But if instead you notice that thought and you say, oh, there's a thought, there I'm noticing that I'm having some sensations in my throat. Oh, and I'm noticing now that I have a thought about a fearful reaction to that. And then you say, okay, that's what happened. And then you wait for the next thing, right? That could be one way of doing a mindfulness exercise, is you wait for new thoughts and you just keep on observing and you keep on observing. So that's an example of you standing on the banks, okay? So ACT encourages you to stand on the bank of the river, don't be jumping in the river. But the nature of our mind is such that you will get swept up. The current there will be times where there'll be like a tsunami, and it will sweep you up into the river and you will start flowing with the river. Your job is to climb out of the river again and go back to observing it from the banks. Okay, so I really described the ACT in a really tiny nutshell, okay? Because if you look at the study that I summarized, where I talk about ACT, you'll see that in that study, when they helped people get really awesome results by using ACT to eliminate their panic attacks, they spent 4 sessions, 4 1-hour sessions, so that's 4 hours discussing all of the ACT concepts. So this is not, to really apply it, you really got to dive deep. You really got to understand a lot of things, okay? So leave a comment. If you want me to break this down, I'd happily break this down into maybe, multiple videos. So just leave a comment if you want me to do that. Now paradoxical intent. So now imagine that you're doing that. You're having a panic attack, and you jump into your ACT skills. So you start working towards standing on the banks of the river as opposed to getting swept up by the river of your mind. And then when you feel like your willingness has reached a certain level, when you've found a steady place to sit with whatever is occurring for you, not pulling it, not pushing it, not doing anything to it, just letting it all hang out, letting it all be there. When you feel willing enough and you're experiencing all this, you'll tell yourself, okay, now I want to make it worse. Go, right? That's paradoxical intent. Boom. You're now trying to jump to 100, and this should completely destroy your panic. By being closer to where we want to take you with paradoxical intent, you should have an easier time doing that awesome haymaker knockout punch and completely interrupting panic attacks, okay? And once you do this once, typically what I've noticed is that once people can do this just once, the experience is so liberating, it's so relieving, it's so powerful that they remember it very, very well. So well that they can just repeat it over and over again from then on out. Okay? So this is the whole conceptualization. I hope it's clear. You want to be moving. Your job is to moving as high up this hierarchy as possible. But sometimes you won't be able to. You'll have a hard time. You find yourself resisting. You might say to yourself, okay, I want to make this worse. Let's make it. Come on, go, bring it on, right? And you feel that resistance. You can tell, right? As you're doing this, you'll be able to tell internally, am I resisting this, or am I truly just like balls to the wall? Careless? I'm in a place of careless abandon. That's kind of what you gotta be in. You gotta be in this place of careless abandon, like, F it, let's go. Like, so you'll know internally whether you're there or not. And if you find yourself not quite there, you go back down to ACT, and you'll practice that until you feel like you might have gotten enough willingness, harnessed enough willingness to bounce back up again. And you'll keep on trying to bounce. You'll be bouncing between these two, bounce, until you can finally pull off paradoxical intent. Because once you pull it off, it's game over for panic, all right? That's why it's so awesome. All right, so let me go into the next thing. Okay, so now let me explain. Here, if you watch the other videos, then you probably have seen me explain this concept already a handful of times. But let's cover the reason, the rationale, the mechanism, the theoretical underpinning for why PI should work so well. Let me first get a water break. Okay, here we go. Let me just read this. In the study of PI's potential to interrupt panic attacks, the idea of anticipation anxiety plays a crucial role. The concept was explored by Viktor Frankl in the early 20th century, who used paradoxical intent to nullify it. Patients with panic disorder often find themselves trapped in a cycle driven by the fear of experiencing panic attacks and their associated catastrophes. Fear-induced symptoms are perceived as signals of danger, to which the patient responds with more fear, creating a cycle and intensifying the sense of impending disaster. Does that sound like you? It should. As the overall intensity of the experience grows, the patient's assessment of the likelihood of a catastrophe increases, and so does the associated anticipation of it. This state reaches its peak when the patient becomes confident that the catastrophe is imminent, akin to the heightened fear one might experience in the face of an imminent physical attack. So, hopefully that was clear, right? But we can paint this situation even more clearly. And listen, once we do that, once we define it like this, there's some cool consequences of it. And I'm going to expand on that in future videos where I discuss other future experimental directions that we can take to make this even more potent. But for now, for this, I have it like this. I have a tendency to go everywhere. So let me try to really just focus on one thing. So there is a nice way of conceptualizing this. Let me just scroll down a little lower through a little scenario. Okay. Here, anticipation anxiety and the knife attacker scenario. To understand the role of anticipation anxiety in this cycle, consider a metaphor where an individual is in a long hallway. So imagine you're in a long hallway facing an aggressive man with a knife. So you're in a long hallway, the aggressive man is at the end of the hallway, far, far away, maybe let's just say, I don't know, like 50 to 100 feet away, and you see him, he's got a knife. The initial sight of the potential threat brings a certain level of anxiety, right? You would see him and you'd be like, what the hell is he doing with a knife? What the hell? And there's nowhere else for me to go, right? You're trapped. So this is like a one-way hallway. As the man approaches, the anticipation and certainty of facing mortal danger increases, right? The closer he gets to you, the more you go like, oh, like what the hell is he doing coming up to me with a knife? With fear peaking at the realization of an imminent attack, such as when the man is within arm's reach and begins to swing. So just imagine that. You got the attacker far away, and with each step that he takes closer towards you, you're starting to get a little more concerned, a little more, and you start eventually, like if he's halfway, and let's say he's walking briskly, you're starting to freak out, like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? And now imagine progressively he gets closer and closer, and he gets up to you right in your face, and your eyes are just locked in on the hand that's holding the knife. And all you see in the last moment is him starting to swing. And if you can imagine how quick that moment is, it's like this, right? It's a split second. So now imagine what you would feel in that moment. That moment that represents, you see the velocity of the knife. The knife is flying towards your body. And you know at this point, you can't move your body out of the way fast enough. I don't know if you've ever experienced that sensation. I certainly have in traffic. I remember I was driving and I'm driving in the right lane. So there's like gas stations on the right-hand side. And I'm driving, and somebody just at the last second pulls out right in front of me, right? And so my passenger, he doesn't even have time to say what was going on. I was trying to switch to the left lane, so I wasn't looking straight ahead. I was looking in the left-hand mirror, and he pulls out at the last second right in front of me. My passenger has no time to say anything. All he says is boom, and I quickly glance over, and all I see is the car. Can you imagine what that feeling is like? That moment of, I'm about to hit there's just no way. This is just way too close. Luckily, I managed to swerve out of the way at the last second, but it was that white, cold whoosh of fear that washed over me. So now imagine the same thing, but like with a knife, coming at you. That last moment of, there's no way to escape it. Maybe you still try. Obviously, I still try to escape it in desperation, and thank God I succeeded. But that's that moment. That's the peak of your panic attack. Except with panic attacks, you relive that moment over and over again, right? So it's like a whoosh, and then it kind of chills out. Then you have another symptom, and whoosh, right? So that's what this metaphor is trying to communicate. This moment mirrors the peak of a panic attack, suggesting that the intensity of fear in a panic attack has a definable limit. So this is, to me, this is very consequential. Oh, that's not what I meant. This is very consequential. Knowing that panic attack has a definable limit tells us something. One of the things that people with panic attacks think is that this threat, this experience is limitless. But by understanding how it works, how panic works, we can now see its limit. And suddenly the fear gets more contained. This is one way of helping you see that this doesn't get any worse. You know, you've already experienced the worst. It does not get any worse, right? You've already experienced the peak. It's that moment of knife coming at you, or that moment of near hit in a traffic accident, in a traffic condition. This realization is clinically important and leads to novel intervention that's not part of this research proposal, but will be explored in the discussion section of this paper. So I'm not going to cover it here in this video, but I wanted to introduce it here to whet your appetite for the next video that I'm going to make. So now let's explore, how does paradoxical intent get rid of this anticipation anxiety? PI, paradoxical intent, PI might be effective because it removes this anticipation anxiety. By approaching feared stimuli directly, so feared stimuli refers to the thing that sets off your fearful response. So in this case, maybe the man with a knife, or for you, maybe it's a sensation in your throat that you might suffocate. Maybe it's something related to having a cardiac event, like a heart attack or something. Maybe it's something that makes you feel like you're going to faint or lose your mind. Those are the common fears that people have. The patient is no longer, By approaching feared stimuli directly, PI cuts out the anticipatory phase fueling the fear cycle. The patient is no longer anxiously anticipating when and where the catastrophe will strike, because they are already mentally there. Does that track? This approach is analogous to the individual in the metaphor deciding to confront the attacker. You're just bum rushing him, eliminating the period of anticipatory tension and fear. Without anticipation, the patient experiences only conditioned fear responses to the symptoms, greatly reducing the overall intensity of the experience. Let me repeat that again. Without anticipation, the patient experiences only conditioned fear responses. So you have already these automatic responses when you feel something in your body, when you feel a symptom that's associated, when you see a sign that's associated with having a panic attack, and you have like, whoa, right? Like a little freak out moments. That's all you will experience. And the intensity of them will drop lower and lower and lower. That's at most what you will experience. There will not be this constant rise and total escalation to a full-blown panic attack. This idea is supported by research. There's research that looks at this, such as the study by Davidson et al., which showed higher levels of physiological arousal and negative affect in socially phobic individuals during anticipation compared to the actual event. So the study was on public speaking, and they looked at two groups. They looked at a group of people who were socially phobic and a group of people who just normal control, so they did not have social phobia. And they found that those who were socially phobic, their anxiety spiked while they were waiting to make their speech, and then it dropped during the speech, right? So the wait is always worse than the actual event. Whereas if you compare it to normal controls, meaning people who did not have social phobia, their anxiety slowly escalated. It was lower overall, and it slowly rose during the waiting, and then it rose just a little bit more during the presentation. But overall, the level of anxiety was lower. Therefore, PI's potential in treating panic disorder may lie in its ability to nullify anticipatory anxiety that is crucial in perpetuating the cycle of panic attacks. So let me explain to you, I've done this in the other videos, but let me also do it here in case you didn't watch the other videos. Let me explain to you a symbolic way of understanding the panic cycle. The most unifying symbol for panic attack is a spiral, is a shrinking spiral that rises higher and higher. So here it is. This is the beginnings of your panic attack. Higher, 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 peak. Okay? And it creates this triangular shape with a top of the triangle representing the peak of your panic experience. So now let me just break it down real quick. Why is it a spiral? Because panic is a fear of fear phenomena, symptoms of fear, to be more specific. So there's fear, you have a fearful reaction or anxiety, whatever. And then you have, naturally, like everybody else, you have symptoms that you can feel, symptoms of fear. So, but you fear those symptoms because they signify to you impending danger. They signify to you that a panic attack might happen, or whatever your interpretation is, catastrophic interpretation is of associated with a panic attack, right? So this is a loop, right? It goes in circles, and with each rotation, typically the intensity of the whole experience rises. How do we measure that? How do we capture that intensity, overall intensity? Well, the intensity is best captured by your anticipation anxiety, right? So anticipation anxiety is 0 or 100. Right, so your anticipation 0 means you're just chilling, you're calm, relaxed. 100, you have a full-blown panic attack, right? That's the peak experience. So to you and to everybody who has panic attacks, the intensity of your symptoms is indicative of how close on this scale you are to the 100%. That's your anticipation anxiety. The oh shit scale, let's call it. All right, so I think that's straightforward, right? The more intense your symptoms, the more afraid you are of having to experience the worst of the worst, right? So you start out here, your symptoms get a little worse, a little worse. All right, so we can combine these two things into one symbol, and this is it. So as you can see, this spiral represents the loops, the fear of fear loops, and the escalating nature, the up and down motion, represents your anticipation anxiety. So basically what happens is you loop fear of fear, fear of fear, anticipation growing, fear of fear, anticipation growing, fear of fear, anticipation growing, fear of fear, until you get to the 100. So there is your symbolic representation of panic. Okay? So that's it. But you know what? Let me just cover this. I'll cover it again in another video, discussing possible ways of improving the application of paradoxical intent. But let me just give you the obvious conclusion. So from what I discussed up above, from the discussion of the conceptualization of how panic works with anticipation anxiety, we can reach the conclusion that there is a limit to the experience. And to be honest, as someone who had a panic disorder, I concur. There is a limit. There's a certain level that it just doesn't go past. So what can we do with that? We can prepare you to remember that willingness scale. Really, like the whole application of ACT and PI is all about moving you on this willingness scale, right? We can raise your willingness a little bit. I don't know to what extent. It's hard for me to predict, but definitely have some impact by preparing you for what that top peak experience could be. Rehearsing that peak experience. And how can we do that? Through a very basic visualization exercise. So this is something that you can do with yourself. Let me read this little short paragraph. One such direction is the exploration of imaginative exposure interventions, like the knife attacker scenario, as a preliminary step in exposure therapy. This preparatory technique could play a crucial role in acclimatizing patients to the peak experience of panic, thereby increasing their sense of predictability by reducing the patient's fear of unknown, right? So suddenly the panic attacks won't feel so unpredictable. You'll know what's waiting for you at the top because you've spent multiple times envisioning that moment, that white cold fear I was talking about with the knife attacker, or the white cold fear you might feel, the whoosh moment that you might feel whenever you get into an almost accident, right? Or maybe if you're a guy, or maybe even women, if you've ever been in a fight and you feel like it's about to go down, that's probably somewhat similar, though probably not as catastrophic, right? Probably being faced with a knife attacker is a lot more catastrophic. So by rehearsing that moment, this is what's waiting for me. Okay, what could be, ask yourself, what could be the worst experience? What will the peak of a panic attack feel like? Well, it would feel like that split-second moment before a disaster strikes. Is there something in my life where I've experienced that before? ask yourself that and search your mind for it, because when you find it, that's it. That's your peak experience of a panic attack. Okay, and just rehearse that. Remind yourself that this is the worst as it gets. You've survived that before. And so this should make the panic attack on some level less unknowable, more knowable. Now you know where it maxes out, and more predictable, right? So this should increase your willingness and facilitate faster progression through the exposure hierarchy. I didn't mention what the exposure hierarchy is. For the sake of this, I should probably mention that, right? So, yeah, let me explain the exposure hierarchy real quick. Oh, we're already at 35 minutes. Oh my gosh. Okay. Quickly explaining what the exposure hierarchy. Okay, so I already explained to you ACT and how you'll be bouncing between ACT and PI. So let me go back to that that hierarchy, the triangle, because that will make it easier. Okay, this is our treatment. This is what you'll be doing, right? So you just to remind you, you'll be bouncing between ACT and paradoxical intent and back to ACT until you can successfully pull off paradoxical intent. So how do we put this into effect? How do we practice this? There'll be another triangle. There's a lot of triangles. We like to use hierarchies, or at least I like to use hierarchies. This is the exposure hierarchy. If you watch my other videos, then you've already heard of this before. This exposure hierarchy, it just represents the order in which you'll be doing scary stuff, right? So you have a panic disorder. Let's just say you have a panic disorder. You have triggers. We can trigger your panic attacks. There are 3 types of panic attacks, broadly speaking. There's cardiac, then there is respiratory, and then there is derealized. Derealized. Okay. So the reason why I bring them up is because those 3 classes of panic attacks have different ways of triggering those panic attacks. So cardiac, usually having a high pulse will trigger it. Maybe feeling little muscle tensions in your chest or in your back. Respiratory, whenever you experience any difficulty breathing, so like on a stuffy day, that might be something that will set you off. And then derealized, that one's a little trickier to pull off. We just because there's no direct way. Derealized refers to when you feel like you're going crazy, or when you feel like you're losing touch with reality. You might be fearing losing control over your own body. You might fainting. I think fainting falls under this category. So this one is a little trickier to pull off, but there's still ways to get at it. So okay, let's go through examples of how to set off your panic attacks, because we'll be using that in the exposure hierarchy. This is called the exposure hierarchy. Okay, so if you have a cardiac type of panic attack, by the way, most people have a mixture. Like after about a year of dealing with panic attacks, panic disorder, people just end up having a mixture of all of them. But oftentimes there's a dominant preoccupation. So if you have a cardiac preoccupation, we might have you run in place. And so the first step might be running in place for, I don't know, let's just say a minute. So that would be step, well, let's not use 0, let's use 1. Right, so step 1 will be running in place for 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay. Step 2 might be running in place for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and so on and so forth. Okay. That could be an example. Another example for cardiac could be if it's aches and pains that sets you off, maybe just pressing in on your finger with your finger here, or wherever you feel freaked out the most. So step 1 might just be lightly pressing it. Step 2 might be pressing a little bit harder. What else can we do for cardiac? Well, whatever. That's enough examples for that. How about respiratory? Respiratory, one great example is you grab a straw and you'll be breathing through it. So one way to control the intensity. So step 1 for respiratory might be breathing through the straw for 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Step 2 might be breathing for 60 seconds. And so on and so forth. You get the concept. You can also shrink the straw, larger straws, smaller straws. What else could be? Another example of setting off respiratory panic is through, you throw a blanket over your head, right? And then it creates that carbon dioxide and all that good stuff, and it starts getting stuffy, and that usually freaks people out. So again, we would use time to modulate the intensity of the exposure. And same idea, right? Derealized. Derealized is a little more trickier. So here, one thing that tends to overlap between respiratory and derealized is hyperventilation. So we might have you hyperventilate for 30 seconds, then a minute, then 2 minutes, right? Another example of derealized is dizziness, so fear of fainting. That's related to fear of losing control. So we might have you spin in circles, get you dizzy. And again, we control the intensity by how many spins you do, how long you spend under how long you hyperventilate. So that's the concept, right? That there's many ways of triggering these things. There's also a lighter way that I do in my practice. What I do is, before I start any of these harder exposures, harder triggers, I do Gestalt grounding. Gestalt grounding. So that's in the case of panic attacks, a panic disorder, it's a nice way of gently introducing you to interoceptive exposure. The basic concept is I walk you through a kind of like a mindfulness exercise where you pay attention to your body and in great detail. And I'll ask you like specific questions to help you explore the sensations you feel. And I think that I have an old video somewhere where I do like a sample of this Gestalt grounding exercise. I find that for a lot of people, it's enough to just start paying attention to their own bodies, to the specific areas that are associated with panic, to escalate the anxiety, right? So a lot of times that could be step one. Just pay attention to your body. Well, there's no more room for me to put it in here, put it on the exposure hierarchy. So that's the idea. So what you'll be doing, so now how do we combine ACT with PI? How do we apply it? How do we apply this triangle to this triangle? You'll be practicing these skills, the acceptance-based skills and paradoxical intent, as you move your way up this hierarchy, okay? So it's 1, 2, I should probably just start a clean version of this hierarchy. Let me remove this all, erase. Let's draw a fresh one, all right? Here we go. So you'll start with something light, and you'll first start with ACT skills. So you'll try your ACT skills, and then you'll try paradoxical intent on that same thing. See how it goes. How do we decide whether you should move to the next level? How do we know whether you should move to step 2? Not the way it's traditionally done. So the way it's traditionally done with exposure hierarchies is waiting until your anxiety drops to a sufficiently low level. But we're not really worried about your anxiety. We don't care about what your anxiety feels like, and you shouldn't either. Because what we're gunning after is your willingness. Willingness. That's really your cure. This is your cure to panic. Maximizing that willingness. So, how do you know whether you are ready for step 2? When you feel willing to do it, okay? So, you'll do step 1, apply acceptance-based interventions, then apply paradoxical-based interventions, and then when you feel like, okay, I think I'm willing to try to challenge myself with a more intense experience, and then you go to step 2. And you'll challenge yourself there. And you'll again, practice acceptance-based interventions, and then you'll try to move to paradoxical intent. And then when you're struggling, if you're struggling with paradoxical intent, you drop back down to ACT, okay? And that's all you do. And then when you feel ready, you go for 3. And you try to stretch. You're trying to stretch that willingness. You're think of it like working out. It's just like working out. You're always pushing for more, right? So if you're lifting, you'll get to that last rep where it feels exhausting. It's just really hard to lift, but that's really where you get gains. That's really where you make progress. Same thing here. You're always trying to stretch your willingness to the next level, okay? And that is it at its core. Eventually you'll probably reach, you'll find your match, and that's going to be a good place for you to wrestle with. So let's say at step 3, you're like, oh man, this is really challenging. Woo! And that's where you'll keep working. You'll keep bouncing between paradoxical intent and acceptance, back and forth, and entire time trying to completely surrender to what you're experiencing. Not just surrender, but wanting it, actually wanting it to happen. And the hope is that somewhere along the way, you'll have a breakthrough. Because let me tell you, when you have a breakthrough, let's just say at step 3, you have a breakthrough, meaning you pull off you pull off paradoxical intent. When you have a breakthrough, step 4, easy peasy, you got this already. Step 5, the hell is step 5? You got this. You already know the attitude, that mental space you got to be in to pull this off. And suddenly you just breeze through your exposure hierarchy. You just fly right through it, as opposed to just slowly, inching. You'll just fly right through that, because you'll completely destroy that anticipation. Remember that continuum? You'll completely destroy it. Boom, destroyed. No more. Okay? So that's it. That's why I'm so stoked about this. I would love to be able to take charge on this research. Anyways, exciting stuff. I'll bring more exciting stuff to you in some future videos. Bye.